Good morning. Jai Hind. Freedom of mind, strength in words, purity in blood, and pride in our soul. May Vande Mataram echo in each one's mind today. The year 2020 rightly follows the theme Nation First, Always First. We all know the 75th Azadi ka Amrit Mahotsav. All across India, there are a lot of events planned, and at the FTCCI, we thank our head table for giving us an opportunity to plan this program. And we thank you, our chief guest, Dr. Subba Rao, for agreeing to grace the occasion. Before we begin the session, we would like to show you all a short film of FTCCI, especially for you, sir, since it's your first visit for the FTCCI event.
A very good morning to all the dignitaries, managing committee members, past presidents, esteemed members, and the FTCC secretary. On this auspicious day, we gather here to celebrate the 75th year of independence, that is Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. It would really embellish the event if we have some patriotic songs to intervene with. Now I request the founder of Sri Kirta Sangita Academy, Mrs. Vedagiri Sushma, to come on to the dais for a patriotic singing performance.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very privileged to be a part of this celebrations today. And I would like to start my song with Lord Ganesha's song, and later on we'll continue with the patriotic songs. Sharanu Siddhi Vinayaka Sharanu Siddhi Vinayaka Sharanu Vedya Pradayaka Sharanu Siddhi Vinayaka Sharanu Vedya Pradayaka Sharanu Parvati Tanaya शरणु पार्वती तनय मूर्ति शरणु मूषिक वाहन शरणु सिद्धि विनायका शरणु वेद्य प्रदायका शरणु सिद्धि विनायका निटिल नेत्रन देवी सुतने नागभूषण प्रियने निटिल नेत्रन देवी सुतने नागभूषण प्रियने तटिलतांकित कोमलांगने तटिलतांकित कोमलांगने कर्णकुंडल धारणे शरणु सिद्धि विनायका शरणु वेद्य प्रदायका शरणु सिद्धि विनायका कुक्षिमहलंबोदरने इक्षुचापन गेलिदने कुक्षिमहलंबोदरने इक्षुचापन गेलिदने पक्षिवाहन सिरि पुरंधरा पक्षिवाहन सिरि पुरंधर विठलना निज दासने शरणु सिद्धि विनायका शरणु वेद्य प्रदायका शरणु सिद्धि विनायका शरणु सिद्धि विनायका शरणु सिद्धि विनायका. Now I would like to sing a Hindi patriotic song. लक्षण ओझल होने पाए कदम मिलाकर चल मंजिल तेरे पग चूमेगी आज नहीं तो कल लक्षण ओझल होने पाए कदम मिलाकर चल मंजिल तेरे पग चूमेगी आज नहीं तो कल ला 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 सबकी दौलत सबकी मेहनत सबकी हिम्मत ये सबकी ताकत सबकी इज्जत सबकी किस्मत ये सबकी दौलत सबकी मेहनत सबकी हिम्मत ये सबकी ताकत सबकी इज्जत सबकी किस्मत ये शूल बिछे अगणित राहों में राह बनाता चल शूल बिछे अगणित राहों में राह बनाता चल 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 राह बनाता चल लक्षण ओझल होने पाए कदम मिलाकर चल मंजिल तेरे पग चूमेगी आज नहीं तो कल छोड़ किनारा कूद पड़ो मजेदार तुम्हारा डेरा खून पसीना बहा के अपना ला फिर नया सवेरा छोड़ किनारा कूद पड़ो मजेदार तुम्हारा डेरा खून पसीना बहा के अपना ला फिर नया सवेरा सीमाओं पर आज मचलता देशभक्ति का बल सीमाओं पर आज मचलता देशभक्ति का बल 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 देशभक्ति का बल लक्षण ओझल होने पाए कदम मिलाकर चल मंजिल तेरे पग चूमेगी आज नहीं तो कल निरे ग ग ग रे ग मा 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 ग म दा 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 नि रा सा 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 निरे ग रे सा रे सा नि रा प म ग म ग रे सा निरे ग म प द नि सा रे सा नि रा प म ग म नि रा प नि रा प नूतन वेदी आ जवानी, देनी होगी हम सबको अब देश हेतु कुर्बानी। नूतन वेदी बलिदानों की मांगे आज जवानी, देनी होगी हम सबको अब देश हेतु कुर्बानी। बलिदानों का ढेर लगा इतिहास बनाता चल, इतिहास बनाता चल। बलिदानों का ढेर लगा इतिहास बनाता चल, इतिहास बनाता चल चल, इतिहास बनाता चल। लक्ष्य न ओझल होने पाए कदम मिलाकर चल, मंजिल तेरे पग चूमेगी आज नहीं तो कल। लक्ष्य न ओझल होने पाए कदम मिलाकर चल, मंजिल तेरे पग चूमेगी आज नहीं तो कल, आज नहीं तो कल, आज नहीं तो कल, आज नहीं तो कल। Now I'll sing a Telugu patriotic song. हे भारत जननी, हे भारत जननी, वीर धीर चरितुलतो वेलिगे धरणी। हे भारत जननी, हे भारत जननी, వందనం జననీ, మము చల్లగా కాచి దీవించమ్మా జననీ। హే భారత జననీ, హే భారత జననీ, జననీ జననీ। నాలుగు వేదములు నాలుగు దిక్కుల నీ ఖ్యాతిని ప్రసరించగా, నాలుగు వేదములు నాలుగు దిక్కుల నీ ఖ్యాతిని ప్రసరించగా, ఐక్యతతో ఆ ఖ్యాతిని తెలిపి విశ్వశాంతిని చాటేము। వందనం జననీ, మము చల్లగా కాచి దీవించమ్మా జననీ। హే భారత జననీ, హే భారత జననీ, జననీ జననీ। హిమనగమే నీ మేలి ముసుకుగా, సాగరమే పారాణిగా। హిమనగమే నీ మేలి ముసుకుగా, సాగరమే పారాణిగా। పచ్చని పైరులే పసిడి చీరగా, జగతికి సిరులందించేము। వందనం జననీ, మము చల్లగా కాచి దీవించమ్మా జననీ। హే భారత జననీ, హే భారత జననీ, జననీ జననీ। సరిరి మరి సరి మ పని పమ పని సరి సా స స సా స స సా స స సా। మానవత్వమే దానవత్వమై చెలరేగే ఈ లోకంలో, మానవత్వమే దానవత్వమై చెలరేగే ఈ లోకంలో। ప్రేమను పంచి శాంతిని పెంచి స్వర్గ సీమగా మలచేము। వందనం జననీ, మము చల్లగా కాచి దీవించమ్మా జననీ। హే భారత జననీ, హే భారత జననీ, జననీ జననీ, జననీ జననీ, जननी जननी. Lastly, I would like to end up with Lord Rama's song. It's a traditional song. Rama Kodanda Rama Rama Kalyana Rama Rama Saketa Dhama Rama Pattabhirama Rama Kodanda Rama Rama Kalyana Rama Rama Saketa Dhama Rama Pattabhirama Rama Sitapati Rama Nive Gati Rama Niku Mrokiti Rama Niche Jikiti Rama Sitapati Rama Nive Gati Rama Niku Mrokiti Rama Niche Jikiti Rama Nikevaru Jodu Rama Trikanta Chudu Rama Nenu Nivadu Rama Nato Matadu Rama Nikevaru Jodu Rama Krikanta Chudu Rama Nenu Nivadu Rama Nato Matadu Rama Nama Memelu Rama Chintane Chalu Rama Nivu Nannelu Rama Rayade Chalu Rama Nama Memelu Rama Chintane Chalu Rama Nivu Nannelu Rama Rayade Chalu Rama Viraja Raja Rama Mukhachita Raja Rama Bhakta Samaja Rakshita Tyaga Raja Rama Kodanda Rama Rama Kalyana Rama Rama Saketa Dhama Rama Pattabhirama Rama Kodanda Rama.
Thank you very much, Madam. Madam is also the founder of Sri Kirta Sangeeta Academy. And thank you very much, ma'am, for such beautiful song, which has ignited the patriotism among all of us. And now I request Sri Anil Agarwalji, President FTCCI, to accompany Sri Subbarao sir to the dais. I also invite Sri Srinivas Garimalaji, Sri Suresh Singalji, and Srimati Khyatiji to kindly take the seat on the dais. Now I request Anil Agarwal sir to present the welcome plan to the chief guest, Subbarao sir. Now I request Sri Anil Agarwalji, President FTCCI, to address us with the welcome note.
Morning. Dr. Subbarao Garu, ex-Governor RBI, my colleague Suresh Singalji, Vice President, Srinivas Garimalaji, Chair IDC Committee of our Federation, Managing Committee members, past presidents, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Very good morning to you all and welcome to the 75th Independence Day celebrations. Thank you, Sushmaji, for those beautiful and excellent songs, patriotic songs, both in Hindi and Telugu, and devotional songs. Thank you once again. The journey of India, more particularly economic journey since 1947, has seen its share of ups and downs. Once branded a third world country, a term for poor developing nation states, which has now fallen into disuse. India is now among the biggest economies of the world. At the time of independence in 1947, our per capita income was only rupees 230, that is $2.89. In 1960, 70% of our population was below poverty line, and per capita income was mere $80, which was well below most of the African and Asian countries. But now our 20% of our population is below poverty line, and per capita income is $2,200 in 2021, which is quite impressive. But that is not enough. Lot has to be done and a long way to go. India is now among the topmost countries in the world in the field of scientific research and has been positioned as one of the top 5 nations in the field of space exploration. The country is number 1 in production of many agriculture goods and tops in other parameters like electricity production, coal production, steel production, and pharma production. It is pharma capital of the world now. All this is no small achievement for a country that was under the rule of foreign for many centuries. Foreign rule for many centuries. India's GDP stood at 2.7 lakh crore at independence. Over the years, in the last 75 years, it has reached 135.13 lakh crore. India is now the 6th largest economy in the world, and we are poised to become the 3rd largest economy by 2031, as per Bank of America report. This fact cannot be ignored because 10-fold increase in GDP since the reform process began in 1991. This is all very commendable, but there is a lot more to achieve. The development of the country is not even, and the fruits of development are also not percolating down. It's evident from the fact that India is still at a very low level in human development indices, such as life expectancy, infant mortality rate, World Happiness Report, Global Hunger Index, and a top rank in suicides and homicides. The country is to achieve a lot in social growth. The population growth and unemployment are at much higher rate than desirable. There are many villages that are lacking road and rail connectivity, hospitals and schools. The education system is evolving and need to be improved. I am not undermining the progress of the country where we have done extremely well, but sharing few thoughts where we could have done better. Now, India is aiming at becoming a $5 trillion economy, and our esteemed and distinguished guest today will let us know how the country can achieve this in near future. Sir, as a finance minister of erstwhile AP, of our erstwhile state AP, from 1993 to 1998, finance secretary, sir, sorry, finance secretary, 1993 to 1998, thank you, sir. Sir has steered the state from financial mess. Moreover, it took India 60 years to reach $1 trillion economy. To reach another 1 trillion, that is $2 trillion economy, it took only 8 years. And sir, in these 8 years, Subbarao Garu was governor of RBI for 5 years, from 2008 to 2013. Sir. Now India is, sir, your vast knowledge of public finance and expertise in macroeconomics will surely help us all understand some economics today that goes into achieving the aim of $5 trillion economy. Sir, thank you. We are grateful to you for accepting our invitation and fortunate to hear you, sir. Thank you for making our 75th Independence Day at Federation a memorable one, and welcome you once again, sir. Thank you. I thank you all for joining us at the celebrations and making a memorable one. Thank you. Thank you once again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for such a thought-provoking speech. Now I request Sri Srinivas Garimilla, sir, Chair IDC, to address the gathering.
Distinguished guest, Duguri Subbarao Garu, President Anil Agarwal ji, Vice President Singhal ji, CEO Khyati ji, past presidents and MC members, and all the eminent guests that have come here. A very happy and a good morning to all of you. Today is a festive occasion, so all of us will be in that spirit. But then there will be some seriousness to what Subbarao Garu would present and what I would speak in the next few minutes. We're rightfully earnest in our words. The history of India's economic journey the past 75 years makes a very interesting study, and more so if you look at the 300 years of economic history. 300 years back, India was contributing 25% of the world's economy. When we got independence in 1947, it came down to a abysmally low 3%, from 25% to 3%. That means 1/4 to 1/33. This slide was probably due to the colonialism or the inegalitarian structure that we had in our country. But that was the past. Last 75 years, when we journeyed from the statistics that our president has revealed, it's been a fantastic story. If you look at the world economies, if you look at US, if you look at China, if you look at Germany, if you look at Japan, England, and France, who are just above us, and we are trying to beat them and be number 3, or when we touch 5.5 trillion and beat Japan, be number 3. When you look at this journey, every country in the world economy found their own sweet spot. America backed consumerism, that paid off. China backed scaling up manufacturing, became the factory of the world. We had Germany, who actually bet on engineering skills and made it very good to the top. Japan looked at electronics and made it to the top. Our policymakers, our politicians, our economists, and trade bodies, industry bodies, we need to find our sweet spot. So the next 75 years going forward should become India's. The last 75 years was dominated predominantly by the Southeast Asian countries, China, Korea, and others, which call the tiger economies. We missed the bus, but having said that, next 75 years, I'm pretty confident our policymakers would find our sweet spot for us to bat on. I would end all of us are eager to listen to Subbarao Garu speak, but the one provoking thought, sir, if you can cover that, I'll be very happy. I'm not an economist, but I earnestly feel that India, sometimes the politicians and the economists and the policymakers have to trade off inflation, higher inflation, to get us into growth. Because as industrialists, as entrepreneurs, all of you are entrepreneurs, I'm an entrepreneur, we have seen a very roller coaster ride. We've never had a very smooth cruise mode. As industrialists, we have cruised for a 6-year period, basically a sinusoidal wave, a roller coaster ride, where we had cruise and survival mode. So 2002 to 2008 was a fantastic upward growth, and 2008 to 14 was a slide, and again up. So to save us from this sinusoidal wave, to bring in predictability, to bring in consistency to economic growth, can RBI, can the policymakers, can the government have, I would use the word, dare use the word, confidence or bravery to trade off? I know we are a poor economy. I know we have poor people. I know we are a socialist economy. Having known, which is a given so far, can we trade off high growth to inflation? Let's have inflation run for some years. Let's have a beautiful 10 to 15 years of 10% growth. So we don't every time play catch up with China, but we become a China or become a Germany or become a Japan and become India. On that positive note, look forward to Subbarao Garu speak. Thank you so much.
Uh, Thank you, sir, for such an motivational speech. And now, in order to commemorate the 75th Independence Day, FTCCI, being the catalyst for the growth and development of trade and commerce in the state of Telangana, has compiled a booklet to showcase the journey. Now, I request our chief guest, Shri D. Subbarao sir, former RBI governor, to release the booklet, 75 Years of Independence, Evolution of Indian Industrial Landscape.
No,
It is authored by our
Yes. Now I request Srimati Sujata madam to introduce and invite our chief guest.
Thank you and a very good morning to all of you. And it's my privilege to introduce our esteemed guest of today, Sri Dr. Subbarao Garu. Dr. Subbarao Garu took over on September 5th, 2008 as the 22nd Governor of Reserve Bank of India and headed the central bank from 2008 to 13. He is currently a distinguished visiting faculty at the National University of Singapore. Prior to this appointment, Dr. Subbarao Garu was the Finance Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Dr. Subbarao has earlier been Secretary to the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council from 2005 to 7, Lead Economist in the World Bank from 1999 to 2004, Finance Secretary to the Government of Andhra Pradesh 93 to 98, and Joint Secretary in the Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, Government of India from 1988 to 93. He is credited with financial turnaround of Andhra Pradesh in the late 90s when the state had slipped into an unprecedented fiscal crisis. Dr. Subbarao has wide experience in public finance. In the World Bank, he worked on issues of public finance in countries of Africa and East Asia. He managed a flagship study on decentralization across major countries of East Asia, including China, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, and Cambodia. Dr. Subbarao was also involved in initiation of fiscal reforms at the state level. He has written extensively on issues in public finance, decentralization, and political economy of reforms. In February 2012, Subbarao Garu has presented his world-famous theory on the new trilemma of central bankers, which he named as the Holy Trinity of price stability, financial stability, and sovereign debt sustainability. This countered Mundel's well-known impossible trinity of fixed exchange rates, free capital flows, and independent monetary policy. Born on August 11, 1949, Dr. Subbarao holds a BSc Honours in Physics from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur, and MSc in Physics from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur. Dr. Subbarao also holds an MS degree in Economics from Ohio State University. He was a Humphrey Fellow at MIT during 1982-83. He has a PhD in Economics with a thesis on fiscal reforms at the sub-national level. Dr. Subbarao was a topper in the All India Civil Service Examination for entry into Indian Administrative Service. And he is the first IITian to become a civil servant of the highest cadre. Welcome you, sir. It is really an amazing journey from a physician to an economist, and that is really, I'm really admired. Thank you. And now I invite Dr. Subbarao Garu to please address the gathering on India at 75 marching towards 5 trillion economy.
Thank you. First of all, my best wishes to all of you, your families and your friends on Azadi Amrit Mahotsav. As we celebrate today, this momentous day of national importance, I want you to think of a 10-year-old girl today. A 10-year-old girl today contrasts her life with that of a grandmother born around the time of independence. A 10-year-old girl today wears a uniform, rides a cycle, goes to school. Her grandmother never ever saw a school, and her entire day was spent in household chores, including fetching water, which was a very dreadful task. A 10-year-old girl today went through an ICDS nutrition program as a child, a midday meal at school, whereas her grandmother was for much of her life malnourished and weak. A 10-year-old girl is vaccinated, healthy, and can look forward to living in reasonably hygienic circumstances, whereas a grandmother was sick, brought down by morbidity all her life. A 10-year-old girl today has access to a toilet. Her grandmother never did. She had to wait till it got dark to answer nature's call, and they were all susceptible to infections as a consequence. Today's 10-year-old girl can see practically the whole world on her telephone, on her cell phone. Her grandmother did not even have a radio. Her grandmother was married at 15, probably had 4 children by the time she was 22, was not sure if those 4 children will survive. This 10-year-old girl today will in all probability not be married till she's 20. She can decide whom to marry. She can decide how many children to have, when to have those children. Finally, a 10-year-old girl can aspire to work, look for employment, and dream about her children, whereas a grandmother never ever had time to dream at all, not even daydream. So that's the journey of the last 75 years. And our president, Agarwalji, has put out his own statistics in terms of GDP per capita GDP. I've steered clear of financial numbers because they're misleading, but these are some of the physical statistics, our 75-year journey. We can be proud of all that we've achieved. At the time of independence, we had not enough food to eat. Until the PL-460 ships came and brought food, we were under threat of starvation. Today, we export food. We're the largest milk producer in the world. We're the second largest producer of rice and wheat. We have a space program. We have IITs and IIMs. We have Bollywood. We have cricket. And my son was telling me that in Hong Kong, there is a grandmother's group formed just to watch RRR and discuss that movie. So that's the soft power of India. What I want to do today, as much as this is an occasion to look back, this is also an occasion to look forward. How do we get from our GDP, which is 3 trillion approximately today, to 5 trillion? When Prime Minister Modi returned to office for a second term in 2019, he set a national target that we should achieve 5 trillion GDP by 2024. He gave a 5-year time frame. Economists did calculations said that was difficult because it required the economy to grow at 9% on a trot for 5 years. We never ever could maintain even 8+% growth. So that are difficult. If that looked difficult then, it looks almost impossible today, because in between we've had the pandemic, a deadly pandemic, and now the Ukraine war, which has jacked up the prices, financial tightening all around the world. But of course, we will get to our 5 trillion economy. Economists now estimate that we'll get there by 28, 29, perhaps a year earlier, perhaps possibly a year later. But what is important is that we get to 5 trillion economy, but how we get there is as important as when we get there. We can get there by inflating the economy. We can get there by the top 10% of the economy growing and the rest of the 90% being left behind. There's 600 million people in the country of low income. Unless they carry it forward, we will not be able to sustain and reach 5 trillion or go beyond that. So not only do we have to reach 5 trillion as early as possible, as soon as possible, but how we get to 5 trillion is equally important. First, some big picture. We are the 5th largest economy in the world. Sri Agarwalji said 6th largest. Actually, that is true, because India, UK, and France manage this 5th, 6th, and 7th positions interchangeably. But we are the 5th largest economy, but even then we're just 3 trillion, which is less than 3% of the US, less than 10% of the US GDP. We're a large economy, but we're also a poor country. There are many measures of measuring poverty. The standard international measure is per capita income. If you take per capita income, India ranks 141 in the bottom league of nations. The top countries today are Luxembourg, the Scandinavian countries, possibly Singapore, America ranks 8, Germany 16, and India 141. So we're a large economy, but we're also a poor country. The poorest in the G20, the poorest among BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. We are the poorest in that grouping. And this might come as a surprise to many people, but we have more poor people in India than the entire continent of Africa. For a long time, we were saddled with a self-doubt about whether a large economy like India can grow. We know that in the 1980s, East Asian countries, Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, Korea, delivered this spectacular East Asian miracle growth. They grew from low income to high income in the matter of one generation by producing at home and exporting to the world. When India was shown that example, we said, no, that's okay. Small economies can do that. India is a large continental economy. Large countries cannot grow that fast. But when China clocked spectacular growth over the last 30 years, double digit on a trot every year for 30 years, India was shaken up, that we too can grow that fast. So just some comparison. China, as some of you know, opened up in 1979-80. India opened up a decade later in 1991. So there's a 10-year gap between China and India. But in 1990, by most economic performance indicators, China and India were at the same level. But after that, China zoomed, whereas India just lumbered along. So the question for us, we keep asking ourselves, because India is compared to an elephant, whereas China is a dragon, whether we can, as an elephant, mimic the dragon. And China has always been disdainful of being compared to India. You know, when we say India-China, China is very disdainful of being compared to India because they believe they're in a different league. Indeed, they are. Whereas India despairs that we cannot be like China. We cannot be like China for many reasons. But the point is that whether we can ever clock growth like China has. If you compare India and China, China, as I said, clocked growth 10% double digit on a trot for 30 years. India never ever clocked double digit growth. China's GDP is 5 times India's. China's per capita GDP is nearly 5 times India's. China is the largest trading nation in the world, largest manufacturing nation in the world. India's share in world manufacturing and world trade is in single digits. The number of people China lifted out of poverty in the last 25 years is unprecedented in human history. India still has about 200 million people in poverty. China fears that it will get locked in a middle income trap. India fears that we will get locked in a low income trap. So the question for us is, can we grow like China has? Can we clock 9-10% growth, reach 5 trillion and go beyond that? But the important thing is rapid growth is necessary, not sufficient. We need to take the bottom 600 million people in this growth process. They need to contribute to that growth. They need to benefit from that growth. There's a very important economic reason why we cannot sustain 9+% growth rate unless the bottom 600 million people are benefiting from the benefits of growth. So the challenge for us is accelerate the growth rate and ensure that the benefits of growth are widely shared. In order to expand on that theme, I'm going to talk about 8 challenges that India has to manage in order to reach 5 trillion and go beyond that and sustain that growth pace. The first thing, if somebody asks me, many people ask me, what is it that India has to do? Give us one thing. So if people force me to say a one-word answer for India's growth, I would say investment. Investment in goods, investment in services, investment in infrastructure, investment in human resources. Because if you take the numbers, there's a very strong correlation between investment and growth. When investment as a proportion of GDP has been high, we clocked high growth rates. When investment fell, our growth rate fell. And in its need for investment, India is unique. Why? Because India is a supply-constrained economy. Whereas most countries in the world, most rich countries, most middle-income countries, including China, are demand-constrained economies. In India, if we produce, there are 600 million people to consume that. That is our biggest strength. 600 million people who consume. As I was coming here in the car, Mr. Srinivas was telling me that India is the market for tomorrow. We all know that. But India will be a market only if those 600 million people are part of the market. When you might remember that in 2019, before the pandemic hit us, and all of you will remember, of course, you're all trade and commerce, the finance minister cut the corporate tax rate to 15%, right? 15%. And then I was in the US 2 months later, I was speaking at Georgetown University. President Trump also had cut tax rates. So somebody asked me, how come India thinks that it can benefit from tax cuts when tax cuts made by Trump have not benefited? The reason India can benefit from a tax cut and the reason US cannot benefit from a tax cut is because India is investment hungry. So if there is a tax cut, investors such as yourselves and your counterparts across the country will invest. So India, in its need for investment, is unique around the world, indeed unique even apart from China. What needs to be done, of course, is quite clear. Structural reforms, governance reforms, including reforms to reduce transaction costs for people who run business, commerce, and industry. I remember when I was finance secretary here, and indeed as finance secretary to Government of India in Delhi, when you meet industrialists, business people, person to person, you ask them, what do you want? Because state governments offer free land, concessional utilities, concessional electricity, low taxes, etc. They say all that is good. But what is even more important for us is rule of law, law and order, which is a polite way of saying that please let the government inspectors not come to our factories. So those governance reforms are very important. So the first challenge we have to meet is the challenge of higher investment across sectors. I told you a short while ago that the one-word answer to India's economy is investment. Dr. Manmohan Singh, our Prime Minister, always used to say that all one-word answers about India are wrong. So you need investment, but you also need to improve the productivity of that investment. Why is China scoring over us? If you speak to economists, they say China is able to manufacture and export to the rest of the world, including to India, because they manipulate their exchange rate. They maintain a very devalued exchange rate. They're having an unfair advantage. We've done some calculation in the Reserve Bank outside when I was in the university as well. China may have had an advantage because of a devalued exchange rate vis-a-vis the rest of the world, but certainly not with respect to India. Rupee is actually depreciated against RMB. So we cannot complain that China has manipulated trade against us because of a competitive exchange rate. In 2000, India-China trade was balanced. Today, exports from China to India 50 times exports from India to China. And the trade gap is about $75 to $100 billion. That is China's advantage. And all of us know, living in Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Karnataka, the Ganesh idols which will come end of this month for our Ganesh festival. Some of the thousands of them are manufactured in China and exported to our neighboring markets. That is China's productivity, that they're able to manufacture, make these idols of Ganesh, airlift them, transport them, and sell them in our neighboring markets, and our neighboring manufacturers are unable to compete. That is China's productivity. So a lot of people say that India has no future in manufacturing. I don't agree with that. If we import $100 billion worth goods from China every year, even if we can make half of them, $50 billion worth of goods, we can employ so many people. So we need to improve the productivity of our investment. That's the second challenge. The third challenge is education and health. We know the East Asian miracle that I referred to earlier is a consequence of education and health. China has gone ahead also because of education and health. Indeed, there is no country in human history that has progressed from low income to middle income without enormous investment in improving the quality of education and health. On this occasion of 75 years of our independence, I want to acknowledge that India has clocked tremendous progress, both in education and health. When I was a sub-collector 50 years ago, as a young officer in Srikakulam district, in Khammam, in Ongole, in Visakhapatnam, I used to go to villages in a jeep. Jeeps were very rare commodity those days. Across villages, I used to go in a jeep, and you go at 11 o'clock in the morning to a village. People are not working there. About 10 fellows smoking those chuttas under a tree. They're not working because there's no farming for them. It's not productive. And as soon as a jeep enters the village, about 25 children start running after the jeep. Okay, till it stops, and then you get down and talk to them, and then you ask some of the mothers there after about 5 minutes, why are you not sending the children to school? The answer is they just giggle. The giggling is just the answer. Why are you not sending your child to school? They just giggle. But the silent answer was that what's the point of sending our child to school if he's going to be no better off getting educated? Today, India's enrollment is 99.9% for both boys and girls. That's an enormous achievement. In education, there are three things: enrollment, retention, and achievement. The problem of enrollment we've solved for many reasons, including the midday meal program, which as an Indian, I'm very proud of the midday meal program. It is the largest developmental program anywhere in the world, and probably with the largest amount of success. And we got to be thankful to the chief ministers of some of the South Indian states for having started that. A hot midday meal for a child across the state. Okay. So the midday meal program solved the problem of enrollment. And then in the 70s, 80s, much into 90s, we were struggling with retention. Retention of children, especially retention of girls. Then we had a massive program for building toilets for girls in schools. And that solved girls going to primary school and then into high school. We still have a big problem about achievement levels. We know the studies done by Pratham and PISA studies, etc., around the world, that our class 5 children cannot read a complete sentence even in their own mother tongue, cannot add two-digit numbers. So achievement levels are abysmal. So that's the challenge we've got to crack in the next. In fact, I wouldn't put a time frame. We've got to do it today. Similarly, health. The ICDS program, the Integrated Child Development Scheme, I think it's called, the nutrition program, is possibly one of the best development programs anywhere in the world again, because nutritional deficiencies contracted at infancy can never be reversed. People have done studies. If a child is in the first 4 to 5 years is not getting enough nutrition, and after that, after the child has crossed 5 years, you pump feed the child 1500 calories per day, it has no effect at all. So child nutrition is very, very important, and we've improved health because of nutrition. And we've got to focus on that. The pandemic, of course, has revealed the deficiencies of our health system. And the focus, of course, has been on tertiary healthcare, but I think increasingly we've got to focus on primary and preventive healthcare. Can I take some water? So, education and health, people say, World Bank says that you must spend 4% of your GDP on health, 6% of your GDP on education. Those are important numbers, but how much you spend is important. How well you spend that money is equally important. If you compare states across India, different states spend different amounts of money as a proportion of GDP, but their achievement levels do not exactly correlate with the spending, because the quality of spending is equally important. Do you train your teachers? What pedagogy techniques do you employ, etc.? These are very, very important things. The fourth challenge, of course, is creating jobs. Unemployment is an explosive problem. Nearly 12 million people join the labor force every year. We're not even able to employ half as many people. We're not even been able to find jobs for even half those people. So it's accumulating year on year, and it's becoming explosive. And when people are unemployed, as we know, it can become socially corrosive, politically difficult, and there can be a lot of problems across society if adult people are unemployed. So we need to find a solution to the unemployment problem. If there is one big failure of every government, including the NDA government today, is that we've not been able to generate as many jobs as we should be doing. People talk about a demographic dividend, you heard about it. Until 15 years ago, we used to talk about our population as a problem, that the economy is growing at 4 or 5%, but people are also growing. So there is no benefit being seen. Per capita income is not growing. We saw that, the sheer physical numbers of people. But over the last 15 years, the narrative has changed. Now we see our huge population as a benefit, as something that contributes to the economy. The argument being that if these people are employed, they will earn, they will consume, that consumption will spur production, that production will spur investment, jobs, growth, etc. So you can get onto a virtuous cycle. Okay. The important thing is to find jobs for them. I don't know how many of you read Sherlock Holmes or even read Sherlock Holmes today, but Sherlock Holmes, are the Conan Doyle books. So Sherlock Holmes has an assistant called Watson. They both go to investigate a crime outside London once, and it gets very late. So they can't go back to London. They pitch a tent and go to sleep there. In the middle of the night, Sherlock Holmes wakes up Watson by his shoulder. Watson, wake up, wake up. So this fellow wakes up and rubs his eyes and, why you wake me up in the middle of the night? Said, look up, what do you see? Then Watson says, oh, thank you for waking me up. I see the clear blue sky. London, there's always fog, there's always pollution. I've never seen a blue sky. Thank you for waking me up. So Watson, what else do you see? Watson says, I see the stars, I see the moon. What else do you see? Then this fellow says, I see God's pristine creation. Then Sherlock Holmes said, don't you see somebody stole our tent? Okay, so that's the whole point, that you cannot get the benefit of demographic dividend unless you find jobs. That's the important thing. You must see that. So where are jobs going to come from? Jobs are not going to come from agriculture sector. In fact, if agriculture productivity improves as it wanted to, it will throw out 100 million people. In addition to all the people that are already in the labor force, we've got to find jobs for another 100 million people who are unskilled. Jobs are not going to come from the services sector. When you travel outside the country, people say, oh, India, services, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Pune. Okay. But the services sector employment is 0.05% or whatever. The largest growth in jobs in the last 5 years, somebody told me, is in security guards, okay? An unproductive occupation. So if an economy that wants to be 5 trillion, the most productive job it can create is that of a security guard. We need to think about what sort of an economy we are. So jobs are not going to come from services sector. Jobs are to come from the manufacturing sector. That's why I was asking Mr. Srinivas as we were coming whether there is still a future for India in manufacturing. I believe there is. See, a lot of people say this debate is very current in the context of the PLI scheme and all that, whether India can replicate the China model of manufacturing growth. China, we know their investment over the last 30 years in manufacturing, huge, massive production, under one roof, thousands and thousands of people manufacturing for the world. Whether India can replicate that. We want to, because the value chains are moving out of China and they're going to Vietnam, Thailand, the Philippines. Whether India can get them, we've got the PLI scheme, we've got a lot of other things going. So the concern for us is that we missed the first bus, whether we can capitalize on China plus one. Now they're talking about China plus one, whether India can be the China plus one, because we have the productivity, we have the labor, and we have, hopefully, the governance and administrative structures for handling fresh investment. The reason people argue we cannot replicate the China model is because China started investing 30 years ago, but today the world is different. 30 years ago, there was no backlash against globalization. Today, there is tremendous backlash. We know that, right? China invested 30 years ago when this value chain across countries, manufacturing different components in different parts of the different countries and getting them together and assembling them and exporting to the rich world, that global value chain model was gaining currency. Today, there is rethinking about global value chains, in part because transport costs have come down, artificial intelligence, machine learning have come, so it's possible there's some reshoring happening, something that could be manufactured at low cost in Vietnam, in Thailand, in India, and China can be manufactured today in Chicago or in Boston or in Los Angeles. So there's some reshoring happening. But in spite of that, I believe India has a future in manufacturing for the reason that I told you, which is that there is still demand in India and around the world for labor-intensive manufacturing. There are certain segment garments, for example, and many other low-tech industries for which there is demand in the world. We can manufacture and we can invite foreign investors, because foreign investors will be more attracted to India than to a country like Vietnam or Thailand, because we're a much larger economy. They're attracted by 600 million people market here. So we offer them that market and ask them to use India as a base for export. And then we can generate jobs in the millions that we need. The fifth challenge, of course, is agricultural productivity. Again, I don't know much about it, but I don't have to talk much about it because we debated, discussed this over the last 3 years since the farm laws were first legislated and then revoked, about what the problem with our farming sector is, about inputs, credit, infrastructure, marketing. There are debates about oil seeds, for example. Oil seeds we shouldn't be producing in India because we're not cost competitive. We should be importing from Malaysia and the Philippines. But to want to produce oil seeds here is the wrong thing to do. Again, grain, wheat and paddy, we know that those are water-thirsty crops. Whether we should be giving concessional water, concessional power, concessional fertilizer, encouraging farmers to produce wheat and rice, which is degrading the soil, which is eroding our agricultural productivity. These are questions we need to think about. Okay. The sixth challenge is maintaining macroeconomic stability. Why is that important? I don't have to tell you. If I was speaking elsewhere, I would tell them why macroeconomic stability is important. But to a club of investors, business people, I need not explain to you why macroeconomic stability, price stability, financial stability, exchange rate stability, these are important. At a personal level, it's important to all of us. If I want to buy an apartment, if the apartment costs 50 lakhs today, 45 lakhs in September, 65 lakhs in October, I will never be able to make a decision. If as investors, you have to invest 10 crore, 50 crore, 500 crore, how do you make a decision unless you have a predictable environment? You need stability about interest rates, about exchange rates, about banking system, about inflation. So you need stability. Stability is a very difficult thing to get. We know what to do. As Karl Juncker, the former president of the European Union, he said that when we asked Prime Minister Modi, why didn't you do this? Or we asked Chief Minister KCR, why didn't you do this? Their answer is, we know what is to be done. We don't know how to win an election after we've done it. Okay, so that's what Juncker said. He said, I know what's the right thing to do. I don't know how to win an election after that. The reason is that in a democratic setup, politicians have a short-term outlook. They go from one election to another. It's a maximum of 5 years. Whereas maintaining stability requires a huge time horizon, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. The reason the responsibility for maintaining stability on the on the price front or on the exchange rate front is given to a political institution like the RBI is because there is a conflict between short-term compulsions and long-term sustainability. If you make the Prime Minister, Finance Minister, and the government responsible for inflation, they will just print money. And if you print money, nothing will happen except that you might have growth going, but you will also have inflation going. You want real growth. That's why inflation control, exchange rate control, financial stability, regulation of banks is given to a political institution like the Reserve Bank. Of course, as governor of the Reserve Bank, as senior management of the RBI across, not just my term, as an institution, they're all aware that the governor is not an elected person. The governor of RBI is appointed. So, and the governor does not go and render accountability. Mr. Chidambaram, finance minister, always used to tell me, what for you, you do whatever you want. I have to go and defend you in the parliament. So to that extent, that is true, that the governor does things ostensibly in public interest. The finance minister may not agree, but the finance minister still has to go to the parliament and defend what the RBI has done, which is part of our democratic system. But the point I'm making is that there is a conflict between short-term compulsions and long-term sustainability. And as a democracy, we've got to struggle with it, but that's a challenge we have to manage in order to get to 5 trillion. I'm not saying that challenge is unique to India. It's a challenge anywhere in rich countries, poor countries. You see the US today, there is a lot of angst and anguish against the Federal Reserve because they're raising interest rates. On the other, people are worried about recession. They want low interest rates, business people. So this is a challenge for every economy, and every economy has to manage this challenge in its own way. Then if you ask any student, as I'm very fond of asking, what are the big things that economies are facing today and over the next 5 to 10 years as they want to grow and develop? These are some of the big challenges. Geopolitical tensions, we're seeing that every day, most visibly now in the invasion of Ukraine, but we see that the Quad and all sorts of summits and conferences, tensions between US and China, and countries having to choose between them. Countries like India are caught between these two poles. So we've got to be able to manage geopolitical tensions. Deglobalization or disglobalization. The growth and prosperity of developing countries over the last 25 years has been a direct consequence of globalization. We opened up to trade, to finance, to ideas, to people. Now people say that there is a trend of deglobalization. The trade as a proportion of world GDP will actually come down for the reasons that I spoke about earlier, that financial flows will come down. There will be checks on immigration of people going and working in other countries. Whether there'll be checks on ideas, I don't know. In the world of internet, I don't know how there can be any cross-border check on ideas. But there is a view that the remarkable globalization of trade in goods and services, of finance, of people, of ideas that we've seen over the last 25 years, that'll be in regression. I don't believe that. But to the extent that it manifests itself, India will have to manage that. Manage to manufacture goods and services here and export them to the world. Diverse demographic transitions. I spoke about demographic dividend, but if you look around the world today, different countries are going through different demographic paradigms. In Japan, in Scandinavian countries, populations are actually declining. In Europe, US, etc., populations are not declining, but the growth rate is declining. In countries like India, South Asia, growth rate is stabilizing. We've just reached a replacement level of fertility, or 2.2, whatever. In Africa, growth rates are still high. I'm not a demographic expert, but these diverse demographic trends in different parts of the world are going to be a challenge for us to manage our growth and prosperity over the next 25 years. Where do you manufacture? What technology do you adopt? And where do you sell? What marketing techniques do you adopt to sell? Rise of technology, shifting comparative advantage. We've benefited from offshoring. Now there's going to be reshoring. How much will be reshored? We don't know. What can be reshored? We don't know. Whether some people say, my neighbor in Hyderabad here, he's into software export. He was telling me that and some of you might be aware of this, that one of the things that the pandemic has revealed is that earlier we used to think that only standardized services could be outsourced, like standard accounting and standard radiology tests could be outsourced. But the pandemic revealed that even the high-end jobs at the high end of the value chain, even they could be outsourced. So it's not possible for somebody sitting in Hyderabad or even Rajahmundry or Visakhapatnam or in Karimnagar to do a job that is being done with somebody earning maybe 25 times as much sitting in Chicago or Boston. So imagine somebody in Karimnagar getting maybe 1/25 in dollar terms salary and producing the same amount of work. That's a remarkable thing, and we should capitalize on that. And then, of course, the big challenge is climate change. Again, I'm sure that all of you are talking about it in your chambers, but how do you sustainably run your business, whether it's manufacturing or business? This is the last of my list, improving governance. You know, if you think about it, why are some countries rich, some countries poor? Where do some countries have poverty, some have plenty, some have penury, some have famine, some have food and famine. The countries are divided by health and sickness, food and famine. Why are some countries rich, some countries poor? This is a question that has challenged economists. There's not been a single answer so far. Just remember this, in 1776, Adam Smith wrote this book, phenomenal book, Wealth of Nations. 200 years later, in 1976, Gunnar Myrdal wrote a book, Poverty of Nations. So in 200 years, we moved from Wealth of Nations to Poverty of Nations. So these countries, rich and poor, many explanations. Some people say it is geography which divides rich countries and poor countries. Countries like India are hot, therefore people cannot work. They're lethargic, their productivity is low, their soils are shallow, whereas our soil is barely 6 inches. In Minnesota in America, soil is 6 feet, at least 6 feet deep. That is the difference in the fertility of the soil, hot countries and poor countries. So people attribute that to geography. People have attributed that to culture, that in some cultures, there is no work ethic. People are not trustworthy. If you are watching them, they work some way. If you're not watching them, they work some way. Whereas in European countries, there is that Protestant work ethic. Whether you're watching them or not watching them, they produce. So another explanation for rich and poor countries is culture. Then there is a standard explanation about resources. That countries which have resources, oil, commodities, they're rich. Poor countries are poor because they don't have commodities. But Japan has demolished that myth. Japan has no resources. But after the major restoration over the last 75 years, Japan has been a phenomenal success with no resources. And you take the Gulf countries, enormous resources, but they're not able to get out of the middle income trap. So resources, again, is not an adequate explanation. The final explanation people give is ignorance. They don't know what's the right thing to do. But I don't think ignorance is any more an explanation, because today we know what is the right thing to do. We're just either unwilling or unable to do the right thing to do. The last thing, actually, I wanted to write this on the occasion of 75 years of independence. Can India get to Denmark? Why Denmark? There's this world famous political scientist, Francis Fukuyama, who wrote a book. I forget the title now. He wrote a book called Trust, but the origins of political order. It's called The Origins of Political Order. And he says, if you look at developed countries and developing countries, what distinguishes them is three things. One is rule of law. The second is a strong state. A strong state is not necessarily authoritarian state. Strong state is strong state. And the third is democratic accountability. A strong state is not that you're authoritarian, but a strong state is that if you do something wrong, the probability of getting caught is very, very high. If I drive on the wrong side, if I drive without a license, the probability of getting caught should be very, very high. The probability of getting caught in Hyderabad is near zero. Okay. So there should be a strong state. I'm just saying Hyderabad because I live here, but across the country, this is true. Of course, you can debate this. Rule of law, a strong state, and democratic accountability. And Fukuyama said that if there is an imaginary country, I will call it Denmark, and every country should find its way to Denmark. In fact, during the US election campaign, who was that Democratic candidate from New England? I was slipping my name, but he said that the US must get to Denmark. Okay, so India must try to get to Denmark. So on the occasion of the Independence Day, this is what I have to say. The challenges that we have to meet to get to 5 trillion and go beyond that. And you as members of FTCCI have the responsibility to contribute to that journey over the next 25 years and beyond. So I wish you all the very best and thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you, Subharu, for your wonderful insights. I mean, you've given us critical questions and answers too on each of those slides that you presented. Yes, predictability is what all entrepreneurs, all industries seek. And importantly, Denmark is a long distant dream, but as long as we become at least, top 3 nations in the next 10 years and continue with some kind of predictability growth in the high single digits, if not double digit for a decade or more, that will be the good beginning for the next 75 years we look forward. Thank you. On that note, thank you, sir.
This is regarding unemployment. Apart from unemployment, I think we have got a lot of disguised unemployment is also there. That is also one of the issues which we are facing. And one more thing, sir, regarding this Denmark, I have read in the paper that if you take a home loan, banks are giving interest to the, it's other way around, maybe 0.5 or something. Maybe they are giving some incentive to the home loan takers. Yeah. How far it is true, but I have read in the papers. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, it is not inconceivable that banks give money to borrowers, that is reverse interest, because whoever thought of negative interest rate? Even when I was RBI governor, 2012, 2013, if somebody said there'll be a negative interest rate that you will be charged for keeping money in the bank, you'd have laughed at you, would have said, this guy's mad. But today, negative interest rates have become quite, I wouldn't say common, but at least they are a reality. Started in Japan, now Europe. So negative interest rates are not so unthinkable anymore. Your question about growth and inflation, I've answered that many times in the past. I will try and answer it again. There is no trade-off between growth and inflation. In the long run, You will have growth only if there is low and steady inflation. Not that prices will be constant, that prices will move up in a low and steady manner, that you have a steady inflation. In India, we think 4% is steady inflation. America is 2%. Japan probably thinks that 0.1% is good enough. But you need some inflation, but you don't want very high inflation. And there is no tension between growth and inflation in the long term. In the short term, there might be some tension because the RBI has a single instrument, which is the overnight interest rate, the repo rate. With that single instrument, it tries to control the entire interest rate structure in the economy. But with that one instrument, it has got to manage two objectives, which is to support growth and bring inflation down. People who want low inflation support low interest rates. People who want, people who want growth, say low interest rate. People who want low inflation, they say keep interest rates high. And this is a tension that every central bank, including the RBI, has to manage. We know that in the short term, people face problems, investors face problems if there is very high inflation. But on the other hand, remember that inflation is a regressive tax. It hurts poor people more than it hurts rich people. If I buy this shirt for 1,000 rupees, and if it goes up to 1,100 rupees, 10%, I may not even notice it at my level of income. But if brinjals are 40 rupees and they go up kg and 44 rupees, yesterday I heard beans are 100 rupees, they become 105, 110. Poor people notice that, right? So for poor people, a 10% inflation means a difference between starvation and sustenance. For us, it doesn't make a difference. Maybe if inflation persists, I might cut something, but I hardly ever notice. So it's important for you that inflation is low. As much as you want to invest, you want to sell to those people. And they must have the purchasing power to buy what you're producing. So low and steady inflation is very, very important. If you have time, I'll tell you a story. Yeah. The Reserve Bank of India was set up in 1935. And in 2010, we were celebrating the Platinum Jubilee of the Reserve Bank, 75 years. And on the occasion of the Platinum Jubilee, there were events in all major cities of the country, including Hyderabad. I remember one event very well, which was a town hall event in Chennai on the steps of the Egmore Museum. Many of you must have seen the Egmore Museum. It was in the first week of January, 7th or 8th of January, a week before Pongal. Chennai was in a festive mood, RBI was in a festive mood, beautiful weather, 7 p.m., just lights have come up, Egmore Museum, wonderful event. And it was a town hall event, nationally televised. The governor and 4 deputy governors there, and there was an anchor. They were never done before, a town hall event by the RBI. Even now, they're quite rare. So when we started that, the anchor asked me, "Sir, why are you doing this? You are the governor. Why are you doing this town hall event? What is RBI? Can you tell these people?" The audience for those meeting were 300 people literally pulled off the street. It wasn't as if they were picked by lots or anything. There's people, whoever was on the street, 300 people came, and then we closed the gate. So can you tell us what the RBI does and all that? So in 2-3 minutes, as much as I could explain, I told them what RBI does. Then there were questions from the anchor to me and the 4 deputy governors. It went on for about 20-25 minutes. And then there were questions from the audience. And when the governor and 4 deputy governors meet the audience, what those questions will be: "Sir, I have a fixed deposit in a bank. The interest rate is very low." Okay. So you say, okay, you try and answer. Somebody says, "My son is going abroad. I want to take an education loan. The interest rate is very high." You answer that. Somebody says, "I go to the bank. The bank manager makes me wait for half an hour. It doesn't even give me tea." Okay. So those are the questions that went on for 10 minutes, and this is about 30, 40 minutes into the show. Then I said, look, nationally televised, okay, I said, I want to stop this. I want to take an audience poll. I said, how many of you want the Reserve Bank to maintain a low interest rate and support growth? About half the hands went up. Now, how many of you want the Reserve Bank to raise interest rates and control inflation? About half the hands went up. In a random sampling of people, 50-50 is a reasonable thing you would expect, right? But what struck me visually when I saw that was that the hands that went up for growth were the youngsters, people in the 30-40 age group who wanted growth because they wanted jobs, career progression. Whereas the hands that went up for inflation were the middle-aged, middle-class people who had limited incomes, family budgets. They had to educate their children, manage the family, manage the kitchen, save something for the future. So I realized that within the same community of randomly chosen people, there is some people who want growth, some people who want inflation. And this is the challenge for the RBI, to manage that tension between growth and inflation. Yeah.
We'll open for Q&A.
I have one question. Because I don't want to miss your lecture, I had come. The point I'm trying to make is relating to the currency in circulation. Today, the currency in circulation, unfortunately, is not the exclusivity of the Reserve Bank of India or central banks. Because cryptocurrency, to the extent it has overtaken, we do not know the dimensions also. Do you think that this has also played a villain's role in the inflation rate going up all over the world? When this has been happening for the past 3 years, cryptocurrency has been in circulation. It has been going up and down. Nobody can guess, the manner in which it goes up or the rates at which it gets circulated. But then, do you think that this is playing a villain's role in inflation? This is my submission, sir. The second one I thought I should mention, because you mentioned about China. Yes, China 30 years ago acquired assets all over the world. Recently, when I went to Canada, I happened to tour quite a bit and noticed most of the Chinese have purchased lands of thousands of acres in Canada, and they are keeping them idle, and they want to invest in Canada one day or the other. And Chinese population is quite well spread in Canada. Chinese and Punjab, they are the two communities which are well spread. And this being the position, what you told is very correct, that China planned its growth 30 years ahead, whereas we started planning now. But we cannot wait for 30 years, and we will have to really move fast, for which you have given tremendous amount of answers in all the 8 challenges that you had mentioned. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me answer these questions. Yeah. Thank you, Professor Arun Rajagaru. You deeply thought about these questions, and I must confess that I've not thought about the impact of cryptocurrencies on inflation. But I'm thinking on my feet. I don't believe that cryptocurrencies would have contributed to inflation as much as you probably think, because inflation is a consequence not just of currency in circulation, but of the total money supply, including bank deposits. So I don't believe that cryptocurrencies have contributed to it. Also, because my understanding is that cryptocurrencies are being used as a store of value, as an asset class, rather than as a medium of exchange. So they would contribute to inflation only if they are adding to more economic activity by way of sale and purchase. I do not know. I've not looked at the numbers, but I think it looks improbable from what I've read which is that cryptocurrencies are being used as a store of value, as an asset class rather than as a medium of exchange. As you know, as an economist, you know that money has three functions: a unit of account, a medium of exchange, and the store of value. So it's being used mainly for a store of value. On your second question about India and China, you're right that China has bought up assets around the world. China, they say, both positively and negatively, has built bridges to nowhere. 2008 global financial crisis, they wanted to do massive investments, so they built roads and bridges. They're going nowhere. If you go to, at least in Beijing, I saw the huge apartment complexes, nobody living there. So China has invested an enormous amount, more by way of stimulating the economy, finding jobs, rather than for the productivity of that infrastructure. Probably it'll come to use in the future, but we are not in that situation at all. We are 10 years behind. Maybe China is 10 years ahead. So we've got to meet a huge infrastructure gap, and that's what I believe the government and the private sector through the PPP model is engaged in. Yeah. Ghost towns, yes. Yeah. Yes.
Very deliberately and excellently, the points we have taken. Again, I'm thinking of them several times. I've taken up the station. Many times I believe that inflation is more because of the supply concept, and it has been common. Many times it's taken. We increase the rate, again interest rate. It's a cost inflation. So it's very thin margin on that. So the government has to take a very pragmatic view. Where they have to stop the interest rate and where they
where they should, support the growth. So your view. And second thing is, then out of the 8 points, I feel one point is missed. I don't know where we accommodate that, is compliance, ease of doing business. So what we feel it as a manufacturing unit industry, there is a huge cost of compliance, and there is a burden of compliance where, particularly for MSMEs, where half the time of CEOs is going in just to comply. What's your view on that? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those two questions. First one, I've heard this question before, that if inflation is driven by supply shocks, what is the point of raising interest rates? Because monetary policy, by tightening interest rates, acts on the demand side. So if inflation is because of too much demand and not enough production, then monetary policy has a role to play. If on the other hand, inflation is because oil prices have gone up, food prices have gone up, steel prices have gone up, those prices are not going to come down just because RBI raises the interest rate. What is the point of raising interest rate? That's the question. I've answered this at least 100 times before, and every governor answers this. The reason central banks, not just the RBI, but central banks around the world, raise interest rates, even if inflation is driven by supply shocks, is because of inflation expectations. If inflation persists for long, people's inflation expectations get hardened. You can manufacture high inflation just by expecting high inflation. For example, if I tell you today that if I decide that in the evening, all the petrol bunks in Hyderabad are going to be empty, what will you do? The first thing you will do is go and fill up and make them empty. So just by expecting that petrol bunks will become empty, you can make them empty. That's the same thing with inflation. But just by expecting inflation, people expecting higher inflation can actually get inflation. So central bank gets into the tightened policy rates, because then you say, oh, RBI has tightened interest rates, inflation is high, they're trying to do something. Your inflation expectations remain anchored. That's the reason central banks, including the RBI, raise interest rates even if the inflation is supply shock driven. Okay? Excuse me, can you remind me about the second question? Compliance, yeah. Yes, you're right. Cost of compliance is very high. I know that that's agitating many of you. I should have been more elaborate, but I talked about governance reforms, right? That is part of the compliance cost. You know, when I was finance secretary here, but more when I was finance secretary in Delhi, there's multi foreign investors, they come and say, we want to invest 5 billion in Ballari or in Visakhapatnam or in Indore or Ludhiana. And then what will you give us? Which state should we go to? Where are the best concessions? Then we say, where else are you considering? Oh, we're just coming from Shanghai. We flew in last night from Shanghai. I said, what did the Chinese tell you? Chinese said that they'll give us all this in 6 months. Then we used to say, oh, okay, so Chinese says 6 months. We will give that in 3 months. And Chinese haven't promised to deliver in 6 months, deliver in 3 months. India haven't promised that we will deliver in 3 months. We will not deliver even in 3 years. Okay? So that's the difference between India and China. There is, of course, the infrastructure differences, etc. But governance, you know, it's not just Prime Minister Modi or Chief Minister KCR. It is what happens at the frontier, at the district level, what the surveyor tells you, what the revenue inspector tells you. Those are very, very important things. The factory inspector, boiler inspector. I know that the compliance costs are very high. Thank you for reminding us. Yeah. We can hear you. Yeah.
So, more specifically, the moment there is a supply, there is a tax. Every player in the industry, whether MSME or micro, they have to pay the tax, of course, above the threshold limit. And then there is so much technology involvement where wherever the information flows, the figures are visible, and the erstwhile players before GST who are out of the tax threshold and who are surviving into their own businesses, and now who have come into the GST threshold, and there's a big question mark about their survival vis-a-vis payment of tax. So all these issues which are inherent within the current GST structure, and also recent amendments in the GST law where so many essential commodities were brought into the GST fold, and the impact on the retail sector and the consumers. What do you think about the impact of this current GST structure on the economy? And the second question is this GST collections, where we recorded highest GST collections last month. Is it a true measure of healthy economy? These are the two questions, sir. Thank you.
I think first answer those questions. GST came after I left the RBI and left the government, but I do know because GST is not manufactured by Prime Minister Modi or the NDA government overnight. It's been in the train for the last 15 years at least across several governments. So it's not the achievement of one government or one prime minister. We thought through a lot, and it is true that there were some teething problems. We should have rectified some of them. We did not in the event, but anyway, it's got on an even keel now. You are talking about problems of implementation compliance, including possibly high tax rates, which is getting revenues to the government, but not paining industry and business. But again, this is another tension for the government, that they need tax revenue to meet all their obligations. On the other hand, they need to keep the tax rates low enough for making business and industry viable. So how do they manage this is the question. One of the things we should be doing is, I don't know, I cannot answer your question on GST at a granular level. Of course, they're going up. It's 1.5 lakh crore per month now. And it's good for the government that the tax revenues are high, right? Because our tax to GDP ratio is still quite poor, 10 or 11%. We need to raise it. But one of the things that must happen in the long run is for the direct and indirect taxes to switch. We must be getting more out of direct taxes and less out of indirect taxes. For the simple reason, as I said earlier, that indirect taxes are regressive. Whether when you buy any small thing, when you buy a handset or when you buy a garment or when you buy a shirt, if the GST on that hurts poor people and rich people equally, right? They pay the same level of tax, whereas direct taxes can be calibrated to be progressive. So as we become a 5 trillion economy, we should be working towards increasing the take from direct taxes and reducing the take from indirect taxes. I am sure that the government is working on that.
So,
Yeah.
He said that India will be one of the fastest economy long back. Catch up India being targeted. And I have started my company in 1870. I started doing my business in 1995. I don't like to be a Roman in Rome. You can understand.
Yeah.
So our request is you are educating us. But why don't you visualize the leadership in the center? What is, if I talk anything, it's like a political talk. You have to impress them. You said their short-term goal is only election. But unless this is the very critical time, unless 134 people, they realize that if you don't take action now, India is going to collapse.
That is true. Yeah, I agree with you. And in a democracy, ultimately, it's the people who have to decide. Yeah.
Sir, I have a last question, actually. Yeah, my name is Murli. I'm from Vedavak System Limited company, sir.
From where?
Vedavak Systems Limited organization. I'm very happy to see you here. We used to see you in newspapers and TV, but physically we are very happy to see you, and thanks for visiting us. And my question is, nowadays, actually, when you say that manufacturing industry has to progress, the challenge is when we look at the information technology related organizations and sectors, the pay packets are extremely high, and when manufacturing industry is not able to attract that dimension. And how to set this evenness at income, point one. Next, at the land environment, a milk vendor today, he has 10 crores. He has got some small land around. I've spent 30 years, but I could not edge 2 crores. So this is really shaping the different dimensions, and I seek your views on this. Thank you.
What is the first question?
First question is this income evenness. What's happening in the IT industry?
Okay. Yeah. You know, I agree that in IT industry, services sector, we're moving towards that. There are some people who say that we should focus on services for the future because that is the future. I agree with that. We should focus on services, high value added services. And it is now possible, as I said in my talk, to export high value added services. Now, any service where there is no physical contact necessary can now be done remotely, right? We used to marvel at that, but it is true that some of the security gates in some of the US establishments are managed by people in Bangalore and Hyderabad. If some car is coming there, whether it should be allowed in there or not is seen by somebody here and is managing that. But that's, I'm talking about, that's a low end thing actually, today's thing. So as much as we must focus on services, I don't think that's going to solve our employment problem. Because if you have tens of millions of people, many of them semi-skilled or even unskilled, you cannot employ them in services sector. So for the next generation, maybe 20 years from now, we can become, and we should aim to become, a high-end services economy. But for the next 20, 25 years, we need manufacturing, we need jobs out of manufacturing. And I believe there is potential, in spite of all the development that's taking place, including reshoring, including artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc. I believe there is still potential for India in low cost manufacturing. Yeah.
He's our past president.
Sir, I got three questions. One, did you deliberately play a low key on agriculture's contribution to the 5 trillion thing? In the fact that agriculture contribution to the GDP has come subpar below 20%. In future, the food security is going to be a big problem. Without contribution of agriculture, do you think that we'll be able to achieve this 5 trillion thing? Second one is a little bit of political question. How far do you think that freebies are contributing to the decline in growth of the country? Third, this is actually not my question, Mr. Vikram has asked me to ask. Vikram, yeah. So the third question is, demonetization. Has it helped in, is it going to help in this 5 trillion thing, or is it an impediment to the 5 trillion thing? Thank you.
Thank you for those three questions. First, in agriculture, it is true that agriculture as a proportion of GDP is coming down. The 25% or something when we started is now 14%, but that's the way to go. The way to prosperity is that share of agriculture in GDP should come down. In America, agriculture contributes only 2% of GDP, and America is self-sufficient. They in fact have enough food for the, not only for them, but for the cattle and for the other countries as well. So I wouldn't be worried if the proportion of agriculture in GDP is coming down. In fact, it should come down. I would see that as a positive sign, that proportion of agriculture in the GDP has come down from 20 or 25% to 15%. It should in fact go down and yield to manufacturing and services. But therein lies the crux of your question, that even when it contributes 5%, we should be able to feed the entire country and in fact be able to export by improving productivity. So the challenge in agriculture is not its proportion to GDP. The challenge for agriculture in its contribution to 5 trillion economy is how do we improve productivity? You know, when I was in the 80s, etc., if you went to Japan or China, people used to show you some field and say, in India, you produce 3 tons per acre. Here we produce 30 tons, etc., etc. So there's a huge productivity gap. Mr. Chidambaram used to tell me, we don't have to reach China levels. We don't have to reach Japan levels. Even if we reach the best Indian standard, that's good enough for us. If every state in India can reach the productivity of Punjab in rice and wheat, if every state in the country can reach the productivity of Tamil Nadu in sunflower seed, we will be good. Our productivity will go up. So I think we should focus not so much on jobs in agriculture, but on improving productivity in agriculture and whatever is needed for that, infrastructure, credit, inputs, extension, marketing, leasing, whatever the farm law tried to do. I think those are important directions. On the second question about freebies, in fact, I'm writing something on that. I wrote on that some time ago, but I'm writing again in the context of the Prime Minister's Revdi culture. Revdi ante, I thought about it, but Revdi ante, I don't know how many of you know. Jeedipapu. Jeedipapu is cashew jeedipapu. Jeedipapu pakam note chestam kada adi. Some of you know that, yeah? Yeah, good, yes. So the Revdi culture, it's very important that the Prime Minister has triggered a debate on that. It's not that the central government or the Prime Minister's modest government is innocent. They're as guilty as many of the state governments. It is important that vulnerable sections of the people are given some safety nets. But it should not become a way of political administration that every government or every political party competes on promising one thing or the other to win elections, and having won elections, competes on giving freebies to stay in power. That, I think, will take us in the wrong direction. If we are budget surplus, that's a different question. You know, I don't know how many of you remember, but 5-6 years ago, some of the Scandinavian countries had budget surplus. they realized that they were raising more taxes than they were able to spend. So the question before them was, should we return taxes to people who paid the taxes? Or should we spend it on welfare measures? Because taxation is a measure of income distribution. You take it from rich people and give it to poor people. We are nowhere in that world. Our budgets are deficit, which means that all these freebies are being financed by borrowing. When you borrow money and give it to people by way of a TV or even let's cycle to a school girl, which is very, very nice. I'm not saying that's one of the very good things to do, but all these are freebies in one way or the other. So you should be very, very cautious and very, very critical about what freebies you're giving, because if they go towards current consumption and do not contribute to growth and revenue, the burden of repayment will fall on our children. So do you want to sin against your children? At a family level, do you want to pass on your burden to your children? You don't want to, right? Similarly, at the national level, we don't want to sin against our children. So as much as there must be some expenditure on freebies, we should be extremely selective, targeted on what freebies, when and how much. And I believe there should be a code of conduct agreed among political parties for doing this. Day after tomorrow, the Supreme Court is going to constitute a committee. I think it's the wrong thing to do. It's not for the Supreme Court. It's for political parties to do this. On demonetization, Vikram, I have answered this question several times before, including in your Manthan, from the Manthan platform. And I think it's passé, it's over, it's behind us. I don't think we need to discuss it anymore. Lessons have been learned. In some sense, no black money had been unearthed. But I would say that the results of demonetization have to be seen in better tax compliance, both direct and indirect taxes. So the GST that we're seeing 1.5 trillion rupees every month, I see that is some consequence of better compliance. The GST by definition has more policing. And I think there is some fear among people, you referred to them, people who are evading, avoiding, dodging taxes. I hope there is some fear because of demonetization. And that I think will be the biggest benefit coming out of demonetization. Thank you.
Productivity can go.
Because of the positive time, we'll not able to take any further questions.
Last question.
No, I'm from the time of demonetization, as a continuation of that, I was just wondering whether we can have a line between politics and economics. Like Reserve Bank of India is the authority to decide on the circulation of money. How much should be there and how much more is there or how much to withdraw. But then all of a sudden, can a prime minister announce that 80% of the currency in circulation is withdrawn? Is it right thing to do?
That is why they followed they followed all the statutory procedures. There was, I understand, I was not part of the Reserve Bank, but the Reserve Bank board was meeting and they were asked to pass this resolution. So statutorily, it is right. Whether the Prime Minister consulted the governor, whether the governor consented or opposed or suggested some modifications, I do not know. But I would think that demonetization is behind us. I think we should move on rather than talking about it further. Okay.
Sir, I'm Hannad, Chartered Accountant. Sir, with regarding your talk, I spoke about investment and productivity. Investment comes from savings. Savings comes from surplus. So when there are financial institutions are giving more loans to spending, not for earning, not for manufacturing, agriculture, how the surplus will come? And that is going to be a burden for next generation. And whereas the funds are not available for manufacturing sector and agriculture sector, which is required.
Yeah.
So this has to be changed. In my opinion, Is it requires any change in policy of lenders also?
Yeah, banks have to lend both for consumption and for investment. More for investment because today's investment is tomorrow's production. Whereas consumption, as I said, helps in creating demand for production. But too much consumption when you have no commensurate production leads to inflation. And I've seen some numbers which show that banks are increasingly lending for consumption these days. It is through more credit card loans, more consumption loans. It is risky, but they should balance. And I'm sure that the RBI is keeping a watch on them, regulating them about, see, if there is too much loan going, if there is too rapid a growth in any sector of bank loans, RBI watches that and puts some restraint. For example, when I was governor, there was too much of gold loans being given. We put some restraint on them. So we should be reasonably confident that the RBI is watching and would clamp down when necessary.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Sir, this institutions like RBI should be apolitical, as you said, but they are appointed by the government. What's the way forward? What should be the solution?
Well, even the Chief Justice is appointed by the government, right? So there has to be, they can't be elected, right? They've got to be technocrats appointed, but it's a system, it's something that every democracy tries to manage. When President Trump said, I think 7-8 years ago, that the Federal Reserve has gone mad. This is what he said. And I was surprised. I was in Singapore in the university at that time. Somebody asked me, how can the president say this? Nothing happened to American markets. When Trump said that the Federal Reserve has gone mad, nothing happened. No, in the market. The market just brushed it off. Why? Because they know that the American institutions are strong. Even if the president says that, nothing will happen. If tomorrow Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman says RBI has gone mad, markets will collapse in the next 1 minute, and she would never say it, right? So our system is different. Our institutions are not mature enough, and we should get there. Okay?
Yeah. So thank you very much for such an insightful. So, I request our President Anil Agarwal sir to felicitate Subbarao sir for gracing the event.
Thank you.
This is the green certificate.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Now I request Sushma ji to please come on the dais, and I request our president to felicitate her for such a wonderful performance. Last but not the least, now I request Shri Surya Singhal ji, Vice President FTCCI, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Happy Independence Day to everyone. Shri Dr. D. Subbarao, IAS, retired, ex-Governor of Reserve Bank of India. Shri Anil Agarwal ji, President FTCCI. Shri Srinivas Garimella, Chair Industrial Development Committee, FTCCI, Managing Committee members, past presidents, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. Very good morning to you all. My sincere gratitude and appreciation to all the participants of the 75th Independence Day celebration today at FTCCI. This really shows their love and patriotism towards our country, that we gather here to celebrate such an eventful day. FTCCI has been organizing many event seminars, programs, all throughout the year, but to celebrate an event as important as 75th year of Independence Day, it could not be better than this. Since the inception of the program, with flag hoisting following by beautiful patriotism songs by Shushma ji, the event has set a patriotic tone. Sri Anil Agarwal ji and Sri Srinivas Garimella has enhanced us all with the insights. The release of the booklet to depict the evolution of industry in Indian landscape is one of the FTCCI's endeavor to understand the journey and to take it forward, which is really commendable. With the gracious presence of Dr. D. Subbarao ji and his deliberations, I am sure each of us have been enriched with the right understanding and guidance to march the nation towards the growth trajectory. Last but not the least, I thank our chief guest, all the dignitaries, industrialists, managing committee members, past president, participants, and FTCCI Secretariat for organizing such a wonderful Independence Day celebration. I further request each one of you to join us on the networking brunch arranged in the adjacent hall. Thank you. Thank you very much.